U.S. lawmakers have moved one step closer to approving a major tech bill aimed at boosting U.S. competitiveness against China. The $250 billion Innovation and Competition Act of 2021 would allocate funds to be used to strengthen U.S. technology, with a specific amount assigned to increase production of semiconductors, microchips, and telecommunications equipment. What does this act say compared to all the other bills aimed at China? I'm joined by Skype from New York by Mitchell Doan, Managing Director running cryptocurrency trading hedge funds. Welcome, sir. At Pythagoras Investment Management. And in Beijing by Dr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Dr. Zhao, let me go to you first. Some see this bill as a bigger version of the original Endless Frontier legislation, which we talked about last week, I believe. How do you look at this bill? How unique is it when it comes to dealing with China?
Well, it's interesting that this bill combined a number of bills other than the original Endless Frontier Act. Actually, they put together Endless Frontier Act also together with the other ones like the Meeting China Challenge Act and also the Strategic Competition Act of 2021. So by adding those acts, putting them together, this act actually significantly increased the aim of China as a strategic competitor. So from the very beginning, this act is about self-strengthening in specifically emerging area of technology. And now it has transformed itself into a comprehensive agenda, not only competing with China, but also using all kinds of measures suppressing Chinese economic and technological development, as well as geopolitical competition with China in many areas. This bill includes not only developing technologies, but also financing, for instance, the partners and allies of the United States in the Indo-Pacific region, and also increasing technology and economic small circles trying to exclude China from that. So I think overall this bill has very much enlarged itself into a very big, all-encompassing law that aimed at competing with China and setting the framework for the current Biden administration to compete with China in that framework.
Right, wow, all-encompassing law. Mitchell, do you look at it that way too? This bill would allocate $190 billion. That is an increase from $110 billion that was originally proposed. How do you look at this, the significance of this bill?
Well, I think it's very significant in that the U.S. has fallen behind, not just to China, but globally in its development of basic science and technology. The strength of the U.S. since after World War II is based on its science and technology. And under the Trump administration, as just one small indicia, spending on R&D, science and technology has fallen way behind. So I think that the Biden administration, led by Chuck Schumer, in this bill is, going back to our roots, which is strong investment in science and technology. One big example of the importance of this is was brought on by the pandemic. With our strength in studying DNA, messenger RNA, and the basic science behind the coronavirus, we were able to develop, a vaccine very quickly. Without that basic scientific research, in an interview of Derek Rossi, the founder of Moderna, he was just a medical researcher at Harvard Medical School studying DNA and RNA. And he had no idea that this was going to, result in a vaccine. It was just basic scientific research. And without that kind of basic science, you're not going to be able to respond to things like the pandemic. So that's why it's just one example how important it is for us, the U.S., to get back to its basics of strong research in science and technology.
But Mitchell, here's the thing. I've lost track with how many bills related to China the U.S. Congress passes. It looks like each week something emerges from the Capitol. So for example, Ann Ashton of the U.S. China Business Council said this. She said some of the bill is a genuine desire to respond to, that in a way that will be effective and ensure U.S. competitiveness. But also she thinks that this bill is incredibly politicized. It's a kind of competition between the Republicans and Democrats to come across as the right choice to handle the China challenge. Do you agree with her?
Well, I think, of course, there's always competition on many fronts between Democrats, Republicans, between U.S. and China. I see this as very healthy competition. When competitors fight or try to surpass the other, it just raises the bar and makes the world stronger. So I think this is very healthy competition between U.S. and China. China's doing, it had its plan in 2015, Made in China 2025, identified 10 very strong strategic industries. Now the U.S. is responding. Trump didn't do it, but Biden is. And if both countries work hard on this type of research, it's going to improve the world. So I view this as very healthy competition. Yes, it gets politicized, and yes, the media hypes it as a political battle, but this is to me healthy competition.
Dr. Zhao Hai, what do you think? Because last week,
well,
go ahead. What do you think? Is it a healthy competition?
I don't think so. I don't think so. There are two things. First of all, if you look at the original Atlas Frontier Act, it's probably sort of healthy competition on the U.S. side by strengthening itself, particularly investing more in public funding in the basic science. Actually, in recent years, the overall U.S. investment in research and development is actually pretty big in terms of percentage of GDP in developed countries. However, most of the investment are coming from the private sector, and also a lot of the government public funding is going to the military. So at this point, to have that law, maybe it's a good thing for the U.S. to strengthen itself in terms of science and technology. However, if you look at the final bill right now, present in the Senate, it's no longer that bill. It's a very loaded bill with a very long, actually over 1,400 pages of the new act that has a lot of content about how to actually not only compete with China, but also how to actually demonize China. For instance, there's one part of that law actually talking about how to counter the so-called Malay influence of China. However, there's no evidence of that, and they actually trying to invest $300 million in the next 5 years, trying to counter that by financing some of the so-called independent media, trying to demonize China. So I think overall that law is actually not very healthy in terms of competition if you look at the law in its total.
All right, Mitchell, do you want to respond?
Can I? Yeah, no, I don't think that. Of course, the media plays up the demonization part. I really don't agree with the demonization part. Another thing I disagree with is that there's no direct military spending in this bill. It's aimed at the National Science Foundation, which is our basic science and technology research center, and it's aimed at making semiconductors and 5G and robotics and artificial intelligence. So I really don't like the demonization comments. The biggest difference I see between the Endless Frontier Act and the current act is the emphasis on semiconductors and 5G. There's some $50 billion allocated to those areas. Intel, which is the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the United States, recently announced a $10 billion investment to increase their production in the U.S. At the same time, Taiwan Semiconductor announced a $100 billion investment in increasing their capacity. So it's not just U.S. and China, and these are just the private sector investments. So with Taiwan's $100 billion, that's double what the U.S. $50 billion is planning. And we need to, strengthen our semiconductor manufacturing and entire supply chain. Our cars, our computers, our iPhones are really suffering because of the current shortage in semiconductors. And we really need to boost that semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S. and support our suppliers in Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and other parts of Asia. It's in the area of semiconductors, it's not the competition just with China. It's really many Asian countries are leading suppliers of semiconductors.
Well, you know what? The fact is, a coalition of over 60 anti-war and progressive groups in the United States released a joint statement on May the 17th, warning the U.S. politicians about the Cold War mentality driving the U.S. approach against China, saying, worryingly, both political parties are latching onto a dangerously short-sighted worldview that presents China as the pivotal existential threat to U.S. prosperity and security, and counsels zero-sum competition as the primary response. Dr. Zhao Hai, do they have a point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think originally, if you look at that endless frontier law, it's only about 280 pages. Now, again, I emphasize this law has extended into over 1,400 pages. And a lot of that content is actually about how to compete with China using really governmental power. And also, for instance, they actually trying to block any Chinese participation or Chinese-American scientists who has been participated in the so-called China's talent program from getting any federal funding to do research in the United States. So this kind of blocking of communications and cooperations between the two countries are all over this law. So overall, I think if this law is passed, then a lot of the content in that law is really giving the notion that in the future, competition, not only competition with China is right in the United States, but also to profiling and also aiming at certain portion or certain part of the population is somehow justified. So I think we cannot underestimate the negative impact of this law, and particularly the added part to the original law. And now it's looking very different.
Yeah, we'll see how the final version goes about. Mitchell, you talked about semiconductors. This bill also says the share of semiconductors and microelectronics manufactured in the U.S. has fallen in recent decades. The bill says the U.S. represented 37% of global semiconductor manufacturing capacity 30 years ago, and today only 12%. What do you think are behind the downfall?
Well, again, it's the lack of U.S. continued investment. I mean, just think of the term Silicon Valley. It was Silicon Valley because of Intel and original strength in semiconductor manufacturing. But we have not continued those investments. I remember reading about Apple when it came out with the iPhone. Steve Jobs was looking for a source of semiconductors and chips that could supply the iPhone, which was a very different kind of chip because the chips have to be much, much smaller. They have to process much faster in an iPhone. And Intel turned down Steve Jobs for that development, but Taiwan Semiconductor stepped up. And now Taiwan supplies most of those semiconductors, the iPhone, which was a major strategic mistake admitted by the new CEO of Intel. And now they're trying to correct that. It's going to take 5 years or more to correct that, but it's important to have those investments today. And again, going back to what the professor just said, I strongly disagree that this bill, the current bill, is a anti-Chinese purpose. It really is fundamentally a strengthening and increase in investment in American science and American technology. Yes, we're competing with China, we're competing with all the other countries of the world, but we have to get our basic science and technology investments right, or we're going to lose. Whoever wins the technology battle in the future is going to take it all. It's going to win the economy. It's going to win militarily. So we have to strengthen our technology for our own domestic purposes. And yes, it's going to strengthen our ability to compete in the world, including China.
Dr. Zhao, we have about 15 seconds left. Your final thoughts?
Well, I think the U.S. still controls the chips design and also the major components production in the U.S. So overall, I don't think the losing of making of chips is a big problem for the U.S. Actually, U.S. controls the whole process of making chips.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point. Follow us using the handle Liu Xing in Beijing. Download the CGTN app to watch our show. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you for watching.